Hello. No takers for the Zoom meeting online. I don't think so. It's just me talking to myself. And today I'm going to talk about chapter 4 of my book, Delivering the Impossible. And the name of that chapter is The Pirate Ship. We're working through in chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then finally in chapter 5. Positive ways, helpful ways of looking at projects that help you see them in a way that makes them easier to deal with. The idea of the pirate ship comes from my experience doing improvised theatre. I've done a bunch of courses in improvised theatre. I used to be in an improvised theatre troupe, and I've read several books by one of the originators of improvised theatre, certainly in the UK, Keith Johnston. And one of the things that he talks about in his books is so if you imagine if you have a scene, you have a scene that has 3 or 4 people in it, and one of the things that people typically do when they're improvising a scene is they ask for a work setting. So let's say that 4 people are improvising on the stage, and they ask for a work setting, and somebody from the audience says, on a ship. So the improvisers start miming various kinds of nautical things, and then one of them puts a telescope to their eye, and an invisible mimed telescope, and they see a pirate ship on the horizon. Now, from that moment when they mention that they've seen a pirate ship on the horizon, what the audience absolutely want to see is they want to see the people who are on stage, who are in this pretend ship, tackle that pirate ship. They want some kind of interaction with the pirate ship. But one of the things that inexperienced improvisers might do, rather than tackling that pirate ship, is one of them might say, let's scrub the decks. Now, they might come up with some excuse why this is a good idea. When the pirates come, the decks need to be clean or something. And if the other improvisers are also inexperienced, what they might do is they might say, yes, let's scrub the decks. And so you end up with all of the improvisers scrubbing the decks. Now, why is it that inexperienced improvisers might be tempted to scrub the decks rather than try and come up with some way of interacting with the pirate ship? The reason is because scrubbing the decks is a kind of safe activity. It doesn't require any thought or much thought. Everybody's doing the same thing, so there's no worries about how the 4 people who are on stage need to interact with each other. So it is, and this is Keith Johnston's term for it, an agreed activity. So this is something that is low risk, it's kind of high agreement, and it's not moving the story forward. And the people who are doing it, why are they doing it? They're doing it out of fear. They're doing it out of fear of doing the wrong thing if they try and tell the story of the pirate ship arriving, out of fear of conflict between the 4 of them as they try and negotiate that story. And so they're falling naturally, like intuitively, into this activity which is agreed. And I think this is an extremely useful concept for project management, especially project management and software development, this idea of agreed activity. Because you see this phenomenon a lot in projects, that there is some kind of problem, there may be several problems, which are looming on the horizon. And rather than tackle those problems, the people who are in the project, they seize on some other thing that it's easier for them to do, And I don't want to make this sound as if those people are kind of lazy or they're in some way kind of behaving badly, because as with the improvisers on the stage, this is kind of an intuitive thing, and very often the thing that has caused this kind of agreed activity is some kind of negative experience of the past of what happens if you try and actually tackle the pirate ship, if you actually try and tackle the problem which is on the horizon. So the purpose of this chapter and the purpose of this book is to come up with ways of looking at projects which help them be more successful. And I've titled this chapter "The Pirate Ship," and basically, succinctly put, what is the way of seeing things that helps a project be more successful? It's by seeing the pirate ships on the horizon and by actually tackling them, by actually calling them out, by actually making it clear what problems you can see as a team, what problems you can see as a project manager, and making these problems clear so that the best resources, there might be resources within the team, there might be resources outside the team, it may require some creative thinking, it may require some negotiation and management of a problem that can't properly be solved. But all of these things can only be done if the problem is acknowledged. If we retreat into agreed activity, then we can't fix this problem. So what does agreed activity look like in a development team? One of the things that agreed activity looks like in a development team is that something which is an item that needs to be done, a product backlog item they're sometimes called, or a story, mysteriously it never gets done. Lots of other things get done. Sometimes it might mean that there's some kind of focus on other aspects of the software, documentation or testing or something. I'm not saying either of those things are bad things, but just basically activity which is not wrestling with the central problem, which is the problem that really the team need to be dealing with. Now, one of the things that Johnson talks about a way to solve this when you have inexperienced improvisers is to have somebody as a director who, as they're watching the show, just shouts out at crucial points and moves the story forward at points when the improvisers attempt to not do that, or attempted to just mop the decks rather than wrestle the pirate ship. So at some point, you might have the director just shout onto the stage, "Tackle the pirate ship. Stop mopping the decks." And of course, that's something that as a project manager you can do on a project. If you spot these problems, you can encourage the team to tackle the problems rather than working around them or avoiding them. But there is a complication to this, and very often there is in these chapters when I'm talking about easier ways of seeing projects. And the complication is that identifying these problems, understanding that there are difficulties with the project, is not necessarily popular and enthusiastically received by the people who had the initial idea for the project, by the people who are sponsoring the project, or by the person whose kind of reputation is most closely attached to the project. And one of the things that may have taught the team to engage in agreed activity rather than pointing out problems might be that in the past they've had difficulties that they've pointed out difficulties, and this has resulted in negative responses from senior stakeholders. People have told them that they're being negative, or they've been told that's not what's happening, this is not a problem, I don't want to hear about this again. Or possibly even in extreme cases, people who've pointed out what's wrong with the project have been removed from the project. So when we were talking about the two different value streams, when I got to the end of talking about the two different value streams, the conclusion that I came to was that you exist as a project manager in this difficult space between the idea, which has gained enthusiasm very often by kind of using simplified language, all new technology does everything the old system did but better. So it's got this simplifying language, and this is how it's gained energy and value. And this is in contrast with what really needs to be done to generate a real value stream. And we're back at that again. We're back at this contradiction, this kind of tension. And when we're talking about tackling the problems that you actually see. And so we have to be aware of this. We have to be aware that there are ways of pointing out these problems which can result in extremely negative reactions from senior stakeholders, being told to basically shut up, being told not to be so negative, and also sometimes being actually kicked off projects. So the tricky thing that you're trying to do in this kind of situation is understand what those problems are, and in some sense, certainly within the team, keep those in view, and then come up with ways of communicating what these issues are to senior stakeholders and to sponsors of the project. And this is very important for another reason. So yesterday, when I was talking about the swamp, what I was saying yesterday was you're doing this in a very complex space, and you should try and explore as much as possible what's going on in that space. But if you're working in a project and you're working on the team, you don't know everything that's going on in the organization, and you don't know all the opportunities for solving your problem that are around. So this is another reason why it's really important. So, if using the kind of ship and the pirate ship example, maybe there's an armada, maybe there's like the cavalry, what the ever naval equivalent of cavalry is, hiding over the horizon who could come to your aid. You don't know about that. And so it is quite important. When I say quite important, it's absolutely crucial that you do make these things clear, you publicize them. The line that is just kind of crossed my mind is something that I heard was a quote from Jerry Springer. I don't know whether it's true or not. That he said, "I don't solve people's problems, I televise them." And there is some aspect of that going on as a project manager, that you have to televise these problems. The difficulty is that if you do it in too kind of brutal and indelicate way, the negative reaction that you get as a result can cause more trouble, or as much trouble as if you kind of didn't solve the problems at all. So you're in this kind of space where you're trying to find the happy medium of reporting these things and moving the project forward, but without upsetting too much the people who are actually sponsoring the projects and the people whose identities and reputation are connected to the projects. So there are a couple of things that I think are very useful here. One is that I'm going to pull out is the idea from Daniel Kahneman. I can't remember exactly what the acronym is, but if you take all the first letters of what you see is all there is, that's basically Daniel Kahneman's argument that basically people reason from the things that are visible to them. And this is extremely important in light of what we're just talking about with the pirate ship. The way that you change the way that senior management and stakeholders think about your project is by changing what they see about the project. And so by making problems visible, you're going to change the way that they see about the project. Another strategy, which is borrowed directly from ideas about negotiation, especially thinking about negotiation from Chris Voss, who wrote a book on negotiation called Never Split the Difference, is just simply to ask the rhetorical question. So kind of like, rather than kind of saying, here is the problem and this is the solution that I think we should be adopting to this problem, is to kind of rhetorically ask, well, here is the problem that we've perceived. What do you want us to do about it? Now, one of the difficulties with that is that very often the thing that kind of you get in response is is something initially terrifically unhelpful, like think positively, work until midnight, work twice as fast or whatever. And so part of that negotiation has to be, well, actually, it's not really possible for everybody to work until midnight, or working twice as fast sounds great, but actually this thing is limiting the speed at which we can work. What do you really want us to do about it? So we're getting down and dirty into difficult conversations here. I'm being honest; these are not easy conversations. And another thing that I've kind of realised that you can do here is to connect. I'm going to talk in a couple of chapters' time. I'm going to talk about unhelpful ways of seeing projects. But one of the things that I realised that you can do here, one of the big problems with those unhelpful ways of seeing projects is that they're so intuitive. And one of the things that I realised that you can do here is you can connect to those intuitive ways of seeing projects as a way of foregrounding why these problems need to be fixed. So, for example, one of the negative ways of looking at projects that I talk about is that they're going fast. We want projects to go fast. Very often, a useful way of framing problems that you've identified in a project is to say, this thing is limiting the speed at which we can go. And that very often that will be true. So let's, for example, let's use the example of some new technology that doesn't work as well as was promised. It might be very, very true to say, look, this technology is limiting the speed that we can progress. Would it be a better idea to use some pre-existing technology that we know is performant, or do you really want us to struggle on with this new technology knowing that it's going to slow us down? Commitment and consistency, which kind of, I'm going to be very tough on when I talk about it as a problematic way of looking at projects. But almost all projects have some kind of commitments of deadlines or things that have to be delivered by a certain date. And this is another way of looking at these kinds of problems. If we can't tackle this problem, if we can't get round this problem, then it's much less likely that we're going to be able to deliver things for this particular date, those kinds of things. Simplicity, which is another thing that I talk about as a problematic way of looking at projects. But when we're talking to senior people, we can kind of play on this idea of simplicity to some degree and say, look, this project is relatively straightforward apart from this one complication that we have. There might be half a dozen different complications that mean that it's not simple and straightforward. In fact, that's almost always the case. But this is a way of foregrounding the problem against something that kind of generally people kind of intuit about projects, that like, look, this work is straightforward and we understand it apart from this one thing, apart from the fact that, for example, we're not allowed to talk to the people who really understand what the system is supposed to do. That's a kind of classic kind of problem that we have. Finally, this is kind of picking up again on one of the kind of negative ways of looking at projects, which is kind of very intuitive, which is that somehow all of the detail of the project and everything that the team needs to do is included in the idea of the initial goal. That all that the team need to do is to kind of somehow unfold all of the detail of that, and then they will know what to do. And here, I think again we can say, look, mostly we understand what this project's about and we know what to do in all of the situations that are required for this project. But in this one case, we don't really understand. We need to have more of a thought about it. This needs to kind of have some discussion and some attempts to solve it. Now, one of the things about this is that why are we foregrounding? You might think, well, it's your job as professionals to solve these problems. Why are you sharing them with senior stakeholders, etc.? And one of the reasons is that basically, as I said, there may be other resources. There may be There may be other parts of the organization. There may be other things going on that mean this is no longer a problem because the mandate to use that technology isn't a problem anymore. That you are now allowed to talk to the people who are actually going to use this system because the industrial dispute's over, or the person who told you that you weren't allowed to talk to them, that's now been queried a level above their head, and then influence can be used to actually get to talk to them. So all of these are ways of tackling the problem. And the simple headline for this chapter is, how do you see projects in a way that is likely to make them more successful? Well, when you see a problem, you address it and you report it. What's the sophistication on that? Well, sometimes when you see problems and you address them, you're going to ruffle feathers. And so you have to come up with ways of basically thinking about the Daniel Kahneman thing and what you see is all the... Excuse me. Thinking about the Daniel Kahneman thing and what you see is all there is, you have to keep these things in view so that the maximum number of brains can think about solving them and the maximum number of eyes can look at them. Okay, thanks very much.